They said it was impossible, yet the impossible had been meticulously documented years before anyone knew it couldn't be true. Its violet ink, faded and forgotten in a dusty archive, hummed with a cold, precise logic that defied the very reality it described. And though officially filed under unverified curiosities, its silent implications were already twisting the very foundations of the world, a faint, intelligent light now stirring in the ancient fens. Dr. Elara Vance, as the story goes, and there are several versions, none quite matching, none quite matching, first heard about it during a late-night data sweep. She was looking for patterns in atmospheric pressure anomalies, something about localized barometric inversions over the old coastal marshlands. Pretty mundane stuff, honestly, especially for someone who had, in her early 20s, briefly entertained the idea of tracking Nessie. Her mentor, Dr. Jianli, he was the one who nudged her towards the safe science, the stuff with grants and clear metrics. But you can't take the edge out of someone who's always looked for the cracks. The marshlands, they called them the Whispering Fens. For generations, the locals had spoken of a light. Not a natural light, not bioluminescence, not foxfire. Something that moved too deliberately, too intelligently, they claimed. An incandescent orb, the size of a child's head, that would hover just above the water, shimmering with an inner light described as acid lime, before vanishing without a trace. The official reports, of course, dismissed it as swamp gas, phosphine, maybe even distant headlights reflecting off the low cloud ceiling. Standard operating procedure for anything inconveniently persistent. But Elara, she found these dismissals almost too neat. Too perfectly symmetrical. She got a field grant, small potatoes, to study the unusual atmospheric conditions in the fens. Her equipment was standard issue, portable weather stations, spectral analysis rigs, acoustic sensors designed to pick up infrasound. All very official, very beige, though she did manage to get a few of the indicator lights on her primary spectrum analyzer set to a deep violet, just because she liked how it looked against the charcoal gray of the housing. She probably thought she was being subtle. No, that's not quite right. She probably wasn't thinking about subtlety at all, just aesthetic preference. The first few weeks were, predictably, nothing. Just the usual marsh sounds, frogs, crickets, the wind sighing through the reeds. The air heavy and humid, tasting of salt and decay. She camped out there for days, sometimes weeks, alone with her gear and her endless checklists. She spoke to the locals, or tried to. Old Silas, who ran the bait shop down by the inlet, he was the most forthcoming. He had eyes like polished river stones, and a beard that looked like it had been spun from marsh grass. He told her stories that braided together history, superstition, and an almost scientific observation of the phenomenon. He'd seen it himself, he said, more times than he could count. Always on the same lunar cycle, always after a certain barometric drop. He even drew her a map, a crude thing on a napkin, marking out the hot zones where the light was most active. She smiled, nodded, filed it away. She was a scientist. She trusted data. Most people misunderstand this, but the real mistake isn't ignoring the old stories. It's pretending you're listening when you've already decided what you'll believe. Elara, she wasn't that arrogant. She had a kind of quiet humility, or so it was said. But she was thorough, almost pathologically so. She'd cross-reference Silas's napkin map with old land surveys, hydrological charts, even ancient tidal predictions. She found correlations, small at first, almost imperceptible. Certain ley lines, old aboriginal paths, something about the water flow beneath the fens. And then, the first anomaly appeared on her sensors. Not the light itself, not yet. Just a peculiar spike in the electromagnetic field, perfectly timed with a transient, ultra-low frequency acoustic signature. It was like a whisper that vibrated the very air, too deep for human ears, but her geophones hummed with it. It registered as a thin, acid lime line on her violet-on-black display. What strikes me at this point is how easy it is to ignore things that don't fit, isn't it? To find a perfectly logical, perfectly scientific explanation for anything that nudges against the edges of our understanding. Elara could have, should have, dismissed that first blip. A faulty sensor, a stray bit of interference from a distant power line. The academic path is paved with such convenient dismissals. But she didn't. She recalibrated. She triple-checked. She ran the data through algorithms designed to filter out noise. The blip remained. A ghost in the machine. She started seeing patterns in the historical records too. Not just the local folklore, but archived government reports, old Coast Guard logs, even newspaper clippings from the 1920s. All of them, in their own way, hinting at something unusual in the fens. And always, a subsequent official explanation that tied it up neatly: weather balloon, meteor shower, hallucination. The sheer volume of these official counternarratives was staggering. It felt like more effort had gone into denying the phenomenon than would have been required to simply investigate it thoroughly and honestly in the first place. That's a strange kind of truth, isn't it? That sometimes, the lie is more costly than the truth you're trying to bury. Maybe you felt this too. Actually, wait. I'm getting ahead of myself. The turning point, the real one, wasn't a paper trail. It was a night in early autumn. The air was still, heavy with the scent of ozone and decaying leaves. Elara was hunkered down in her mobile lab, a converted panel van painted a practical shade of gray that now, in my retelling, I always picture as a dull violet, the color of a bruise. Her screens glowed acid lime and deep violet. The infrasound sensors were chirping, a faint, rhythmic pulse. She had a bottle of lukewarm violet-tinted sparkling water beside her, and the hum of her equipment was the only sound. Then it appeared. Not on the screen, not initially. Outside. Just beyond a canopy of reeds, hovering maybe 10 feet above the marsh water. A sphere of pure, incandescent acid lime light. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat, like a heart. There was no heat from it, no sound, beyond that subaudible hum that her sensors were already recording. She stared, mesmerized, her breath catching in her throat. She fumbled for her camera, for her handheld spectral analyzer, but her fingers were numb. It moved then, gliding silently across the water, dipping slightly as if examining something beneath the surface, then rising again. It stayed for nearly 20 minutes. When it finally vanished, leaving only the rippling water and the lingering scent of ozone, Elara was shaking. Not from fear, not exactly. From a kind of profound, unsettling recognition. It wasn't just folklore. It wasn't swamp gas. It was real. And her instruments, her beloved, precise, empirical instruments, had captured every single, impossible detail. The specific light frequency, the electromagnetic signature, the acoustic resonance. It was all there, glowing acid lime on her screens, undeniable. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat, replaying the data, watching the recorded footage. The light, the impossible light. She realized then that she couldn't unknow what she had found. It was a weight in her stomach, a cold stone. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a contradiction of everything she'd been taught about how the world worked, how systems operated. Her next step, of course, was to compile her report. She worked like a fiend, cross-referencing everything, presenting the raw data with forensic precision. Graphs, charts, spectral analyses, witness accounts, including Silas's, validated by her own observations. She even included that old violet-inked memo she'd found, tucked away in the archives, the one that perfectly foreshadowed her findings. She sent it up the chain. To Dr. Lee first, then to the Departmental Review Board. The initial response was, silence. Then, a request for more data. Then, a request for a re-evaluation of her methodology. Then, a soft suggestion that perhaps her prolonged isolation in the fens might have affected her judgment. It was all very professional, very polite. Very much designed to make her feel like she was losing her mind, without ever explicitly saying so. Dr. Lee, he called her one evening. His voice was low, almost a murmur against the static of a bad connection. "Elara," he said, "you found it, didn't you? The thing they didn't want anyone to find." She just hummed, a non-committal sound. "They're going to bury you, kiddo," he continued. "They've invested too much in the swamp gas narrative. Too many reputations, too many grants, too many past reports signed off by too many important people. To admit you're right is to admit they were wrong. And that, Elara, is the one thing institutions can never do willingly. This is exactly where everything changes, isn't it? When you realize the truth isn't enough. That proof is sometimes just a louder sound in a room full of people determined to keep their ears plugged. What do you do then? Do you yell? Do you rage? Or do you just accumulate more facts, more papers, more cold, hard evidence, hoping that sheer weight will eventually break through? Elara chose the latter. Her character flaw, I suppose, was mistaking thoroughness for action. She believed, deep down, that enough undeniable truth would force a reckoning. She spent the next year collecting more. Better sensors, longer observation periods. She even managed to get some thermal imaging. The anomaly, this acid-lime sphere, consistently emitted no detectable heat signature, which again, defied all known physics for an incandescent object. She got aerial photography showing its precise movements, contradicting any natural phenomenon. She interviewed more locals, building a truly comprehensive database of sightings going back a century. She found a faint, repeating pattern in its appearance, a kind of cosmic clock that resonated with ancient lunar tables, things Silas had hinted at on his napkin map. Her mentor, Dr. Lee, was surprisingly helpful. He didn't overtly support her, not publicly. But he fed her information, hinted at archival materials, steered her towards researchers who had experienced similar institutional pushback. He acted, I think, from a quiet ideology, a belief in a kind of strategic justice. He wanted the truth to win, but he knew how to play the long game. Then came the unexpected element. A former colleague of Dr. Lee, a man who had retired years ago in disillusionment, slipped Elara a document. It was an internal, highly classified report, dated just a few years after that original violet-inked memo. It was a comprehensive analysis of the phenonomy, complete with photographic evidence and sensor readings that mirrored Elara's own findings. It concluded, unequivocally, that the phenomenon was real, unexplained by any known natural or man-made cause. It even theorized about a stable, non-thermal light source, a kind of self-sustaining plasma. The report then ended with a recommendation: classify all findings as false positive, initiate counternarrative protocols, and reassign primary investigators. The last page was signed by 3 senior departmental heads, all now occupying prestigious positions. This was it. The smoking gun, glowing acid lime in the cold light of her desk lamp. They knew. They had known for decades. Her second report, bolstered by this internal admission, was a masterpiece of scientific argumentation. She presented it at a closed-door departmental hearing. The room was sterile, painted a neutral pale gray, though in my mind it's always bathed in that cool, violet light of the fluorescent overheads, reflecting off the polished acid lime of the conference table. The air conditioning hummed, a low, persistent sound that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. She spoke for an hour, calmly, methodically, laying out every piece of evidence. She ended by holding up the classified report. This, she said, her voice clear and steady, is not swamp gas. This is not a faulty sensor. This is a deliberate, decades-long pattern of obfuscation. And this document proves it. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, the head of the department, a man named Henderson, cleared his throat. He had a face like a slab of granite, and eyes that had seen too many inconvenient truths. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice flat, "we appreciate your dedication. Your thoroughness is, as always, exemplary." He paused. However, the findings in this, older document, while intriguing, were based on rudimentary technology. They have since been superseded by more advanced atmospheric models. Your own data, while compelling, still falls within acceptable statistical deviations for environmental anomalies. We're simply not seeing anything that warrants a major reallocation of resources, or a reevaluation of established scientific consensus. He dismissed it. All of it. With professional language, he said something that could not be said professionally, we will not admit we were wrong. We cannot, Elara just stared at him. She had rehearsed this moment, had envisioned every possible argument, every counterpoint. But she hadn't accounted for the sheer, impenetrable wall of institutional inertia. It wasn't about the science anymore. It never had been. It was about something deeper, something that felt like the quiet crumbling of her own soul. She returned to her lab that night. The cold light, the violet glow of her monitors, the silence of spaces designed to discourage presence. She sat there for a long time, the weight of her Pyrrhic victory pressing down on her. She had won the argument, in her own mind. She had exposed the lie. But nothing had changed. Structurally, the institution remained untouched. The light in the fens continued its silent dance, unseen by anyone who mattered, unacknowledged by anyone with power. I still don't know if I made the right choice, telling her story like this. Spreading it around, letting it leak out. It feels like a betrayal of her quiet dignity, sometimes. But then again, maybe it's the only way some truths get out. She continued her work, of course. She published her findings in independent journals, carefully worded, without naming names or pointing fingers at the cover-up. She became a minor legend in certain fringe scientific circles. But she never went back to the fens. She couldn't. The exhaustion of being right about something no one with power will act on, it takes a toll. She redirected her research to deep-sea bioluminescence, something equally mysterious, but safely contained, safely distant from the heavy hand of institutional denial. The last time I heard anything concrete about her, she was working on a project exploring the communication patterns of abyssal creatures, living alone, I think, in a small, tidy apartment overlooking a harbor. She had, someone told me, a single, polished river stone on her desk, the kind you might find in a marsh. A quiet reminder. What do you do with a truth that costs too much to acknowledge? I mean, really. When the lie is easier, more comfortable, more self-serving for the powerful. What is the responsibility of the person who holds that truth, when no one wants to hear it? I genuinely wonder. The specific exhaustion of being right about something no one with power will act on, that's what resonates with me from Elara's story. It's not just the anger of being ignored, or the frustration of injustice, but that specific, bone-deep weariness that comes from seeing the clear, bright line of truth, holding it out for all to see, and watching as the world simply averts its gaze. It's the quiet concession that some battles are lost not because you were wrong, but because the other side simply has more resources for their willful blindness. That violet-inked memo, the one that proved they knew all along, it wasn't a weapon. It was just a mirror, reflecting back the inconvenient truth of human nature. I keep thinking about the head of the department, Henderson, dismissing Elara's meticulous work with a wave of his hand. It wasn't malicious, not overtly. It was the pragmatic cruelty of the system. He wasn't rejecting her science, he was protecting their narrative. And Elara, with all her thoroughness, never truly understood that the game wasn't about truth, it was about consensus. That's a brutal lesson to learn late in life. So, what about you? Have you ever had a moment where you realized your absolute, undeniable truth was just inconvenient for everyone else? Elara's truth was undeniable, yet ultimately, it was ignored. If you had exposed a lie and seen no change, would you have continued fighting in the fens, or, like her, sought a different kind of mystery? If you recognize that specific exhaustion of being right when no one with power will act, you're among friends here. We believe these hidden truths deserve to be seen, even if the world wants to avert its gaze. If you know someone battling a system more interested in its own narrative than the truth, share Elara's story with them. They might find comfort in knowing they're not alone in facing that pragmatic cruelty. Elara's truth was ignored because it was inconvenient. If you were in her place, carrying that bone-deep weariness of being right but unheard, what would you have done next? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. If Elara's story of being right but ignored, of facing that pragmatic cruelty of the system, resonated with your own weary experiences, the like button is right there. If you're someone who understands that some battles are lost not because you were wrong, but because of willful blindness, then this channel is for you.